she become that character? But I liked her. She was very beautiful and obviously very, very, very smart.
James Ivory has spent more than 60 years making beautiful films. He doesn't direct in a loud or flashy way. Instead, he watches carefully and creates movies that feel like visual poetry. He takes great books and turns them into elegant stories on screen. From quiet drawing rooms to passionate love stories like Call Me by Your Name, Ivory has built his reputation on making films that are restrained, beautiful, and emotionally precise. Every shot he creates involves important choices about which actors to use, which faces and voices can truly understand the power of silence. Ivory doesn't choose actors because they're famous or spectacular. He looks for truth. He finds performers who can show complicated feelings without having to explain everything. He wants actors who can communicate entire worlds just through a look or a pause. Over his long career, he's worked with legendary stars and discovered unknown talents. Many actors have worked with him multiple times, not because it would make them more famous, but because they trust him. These performers have given him more than just good acting. They've provided the human heart that his stories need to work. Vanessa Redgrave brought something special to Ivory's films. She showed strength that wasn't hard or cold. She displayed intelligence that remained warm. In movies like Howard's End and The White Countess, she played women who carried many years of experience in their eyes. These were characters who understood loss deeply, but didn't need to perform their sadness for the camera. Ivory trusted her with roles that needed emotional depth, hiding underneath perfect composure. She never broke character to show the audience how hard she was working. She simply existed naturally in her roles. Redgrave understood Ivory's visual style completely. She knew exactly when to move and when to stay still. She knew when silence would speak more powerfully than any words could. Her performances weren't built around big dramatic moments. Instead, they worked through accumulation, with small gestures slowly building into something overwhelming. Ivory has called her one of the most intelligent actors he's ever worked with. She's someone who immediately understands the psychology of her characters. She didn't need much direction from him. She just needed space to work. Ivory, who values restraint above everything else, gave her exactly that freedom. Redgrave proved that elegance and power don't have to be opposites. Before Hugh Grant became famous for romantic comedies, James Ivory saw something different in him. He saw complexity hidden beneath charm. He noticed darkness lurking behind that famous smile. In Maurice and The Remains of the Day, Grant played men who were trapped by what society expected from them. These were characters suffocated by their own inability to be honest about who they really were. Ivory gave him roles that required vulnerability, and Grant delivered performances without being overly sentimental. Maurice marked an important breakthrough for Grant, earning him a Best Actor award at the Venice Film Festival. Ivory recognized his special ability to play repression, to show what characters wouldn't say through what they couldn't do. Grant understood how people behaved in period settings, how social rules created internal prisons for individuals. His performances for Ivory weren't flashy or obvious, they were precise and controlled. He played men who smiled while they were drowning inside, who maintained perfect appearances while collapsing emotionally. That tension fascinated Ivory, who built entire films around what remains unspoken. Grant proved he could carry deep emotional weight without breaking the surface, and Ivory never forgot that discipline. Daniel Day-Lewis appeared in A Room with a View early in his career, playing the priggish Cecil with perfect aristocratic disdain. Ivory watched him transform completely, disappearing into a character that most actors would have simply made unlikable. Day-Lewis made Cecil tragic instead. He showed the fear beneath the snobbery and the loneliness behind all that judgment. That's what caught Ivory's attention most. Day-Lewis understood something essential about Ivory's work. Period films aren't really about costumes or accents. They're about human psychology trapped within historical context. He didn't just play Victorian. He played a man struggling with emotions he'd been taught his whole life to bury deep inside. Ivory has spoken about discovering Day-Lewis through his casting director, recognizing immediately that he possessed something rare. He showed total commitment without making the effort visible. Day-Lewis would eventually become one of the greatest actors of his generation, but Ivory saw it first. He recognized the dedication, the intelligence, and the refusal to settle for surface-level choices. Maggie Smith gave James Ivory wit combined with real emotional weight. In A Room with the View, she played the chaperone Charlotte Bartlett with layers that most actors would completely miss. She was funny, certainly, but also deeply sad. She portrayed a woman who lived through other people because her own life had already passed her by. Smith understood perfectly how to play comedy and tragedy at the same time, how to make audiences laugh while simultaneously breaking their hearts. Ivory cast her because she never simplified her characters. She found their contradictions and let them breathe naturally. Charlotte could be petty and noble, selfish and self-sacrificing, all within the same scene. Smith's performance earned her a BAFTA award, but more importantly, it set the standard for how Ivory's ensemble casts would work. Everyone served the story. Nobody tried to steal scenes for themselves. Smith proved that supporting roles could be as complex and interesting as lead roles. James Fox gave James Ivory something he rarely found in other actors: authentic British aristocracy without turning it into a caricature. In The Remains of the Day, Fox played Lord Darlington, a man whose kindness and naivety eventually lead him towards fascism. It's a devastating performance, made even more powerful because Fox never judges his character. He plays Darlington as a tragic figure rather than a villain. That's exactly what Ivory wanted. Fox understood class in ways that American actors simply couldn't quite capture. He knew how privilege creates blindness in people, how good intentions can pave terrible roads. Ivory has called Fox's performance one of the most underrated in his entire filmography. Critics focused their attention on Hopkins and Thompson, but Fox actually gave the film its moral center. He showed how basic human decency can become dangerous when it's not paired with awareness and understanding. Fox made audiences understand Darlington even as they watched him fail. That complexity, that refusal to simplify history, runs through all of Ivory's best work. Fox embodied it perfectly.
Helena Bonham Carter was only 18 years old when James Ivory cast her in A Room with a View. She'd barely acted on film before that, but Ivory saw something beyond her young age. He saw an old soul, someone with an ability to convey internal conflict without resorting to melodrama. As Lucy Honeychurch, she played a young woman awakening to her own desires, caught between social convention and personal passion. Carter made it heartbreaking to watch. Ivory returned to work with her again for Howard's End, where she played the impulsive Helen Schlegel with even greater depth and maturity. Carter understood Ivory's visual language perfectly, his heavy reliance on close-ups and meaningful silence. She knew how to let emotions play naturally across her face without pushing or forcing anything. She knew how to trust the camera to find what she was feeling inside. Ivory has praised both her intelligence and her willingness to take direction without any ego getting in the way. She never tried to dominate her scenes, she simply lived authentically in them. That naturalism and emotional availability made her essential to two of Ivory's greatest films. She gave him complete honesty when he needed it most. Joanne Woodward gave James Ivory one of his most deeply personal films. In Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, she played a Kansas City housewife whose entire life slowly disappears into routine and disappointment. Woodward made her character neither pathetic nor heroic, just human and heartbreakingly real. Ivory has said this particular film connected directly to his own childhood memories, and Woodward understood that intimate connection. She played the role with devastating understatement throughout. Woodward earned an Oscar nomination for this performance, but what mattered even more to Ivory was how she captured the quiet tragedy of ordinary life. Mrs. Bridge smiles through absolutely everything, maintaining appearances even as her whole world crumbles around her. Woodward showed the real cost of that constant performance, the exhaustion that comes from pretending all the time. She never begged the audience for sympathy. She simply existed as a woman whose dreams died so slowly that she barely even noticed it happening. Ivory has called it one of the performances he's most proud of in his entire career. Woodward proved that small, ordinary lives could carry epic emotional weight. Paul Newman surprised everyone with his performance in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. Audiences expected to see the movie star, the famous icon they knew. Instead, Ivory gave them a repressed Midwestern patriarch who was cold and completely unreachable. Newman played completely against type, stripping away all his natural charm to reveal a man trapped by his own rigidity and rules. Ivory has called it one of Newman's greatest performances, though surprisingly few people remember it that way. Newman understood exactly what Ivory wanted from him: no vanity, no compromise at all. Mr. Bridge isn't a likable character. He's cruel in quiet, subtle ways, suffocating his entire family through control and silence. Newman played him without asking for understanding or sympathy from the audience. He just showed you the man, flawed and deeply human. Ivory has said Newman's accent was absolutely perfect and that people from the South praised its authenticity. But more than technical accuracy, Newman gave him complete emotional honesty. He played a man who was incapable of expressing love and made that a tragedy rather than making him a villain. That's exactly the kind of performance Ivory built his entire reputation on: complex, restrained, and devastating. Anthony Hopkins gave Ivory two of his very finest performances. In Howard's End, he played the businessman Henry Wilcox with controlled arrogance that masked deep insecurity. In The Remains of the Day, he played the butler Stevens with repression so complete it became genuinely tragic to witness. Hopkins understood something absolutely essential about Ivory's work. Emotion lives in what's not said, not shown openly. The most powerful moments come from restraint rather than explosion. Stevens represents Hopkins' masterpiece for Ivory. He's a man who sacrificed his entire life to duty, who missed out on love because he couldn't break his own rigid rules. Hopkins played it without any sentimentality, letting the tragedy build slowly through small moments of missed connection. Ivory has praised Hopkins' intelligence and precision repeatedly, his remarkable ability to convey entire inner worlds through tiny gestures. Together, they made The Remains of the Day into one of cinema's greatest examinations of regret and missed chances. Hopkins gave Ivory exactly the emotional devastation his story needed, delivered quietly and perfectly unforgettably. Emma Thompson sits at the very top of this list because she gave Ivory absolutely everything he could want in an actor: intelligence, warmth, complexity, and restraint all combined. In Howard's End, she played Margaret Schlegel with such tremendous depth that she won the Academy Award. In The Remains of the Day, she played the housekeeper Miss Kenton with heartbreaking dignity that matched Hopkins' performance perfectly.
Thompson understood Ivory's visual poetry better than anyone else he worked with. She knew exactly when to speak and when to let silence do all the work. Ivory has called Thompson one of the most complete actors he's ever worked with in his long career. She brought real literary intelligence to all her roles, understanding the novels they came from and honoring them without being trapped by them. She made period characters feel both modern and timeless simultaneously. Thompson never simplified anything about her characters. She played contradiction naturally, showing strength and vulnerability, confidence and doubt, all coexisting in the same person. For Ivory, who built his entire career on emotional complexity told through restraint, Thompson was the absolutely perfect collaborator. She gave him performances that will define his legacy forever. That's exactly why she comes first on this list. James Ivory doesn't really talk about stars or celebrity. He talks about actors who truly understand what he's trying to do. These 10 performers gave him much more than just good performances. They gave him truth told through silence, emotion conveyed through stillness and restraint. From Thompson's sharp intelligence to Hopkins' perfect restraint, each one understood that great acting lives as much in what you don't do as in what you do. They made his artistic vision real and tangible on screen. These actors are inseparable from his legacy and from the beautiful films he's created over 6 remarkable decades.